Good day, everyone. Our program will begin in just a moment. Hello, everyone. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day and welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by American Jewish Committee. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. And joining us today for a very special live recording of AJC's podcast, People of the Pod, is Holocaust survivor Sam Harris, who will share his incredible story of survival and family heritage. And moderating today's timely conversation, which comes 2 days before International Holocaust Remembrance Day is observed around the world, is People of the Pod host, Manya Brachear Pashman. After we hear from Manya and our esteemed guests, we will take your questions. You may email your question to questions@ajc.org. That's questions plural, or you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom. Manya, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And yes, this is a live recording of AJC's weekly podcast, People of the Pod. You can listen every week, and you can find us at ajc.org/podcast, which we can put that link in the chat during the program. With me today is Sam Harris, one of the youngest survivors of the concentration camps during the Holocaust. Sam played a central role in the building of the 65,000 square foot Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, of which he is President Emeritus. In 2014, he received the Ellis Island Medal of Honor. I first had the privilege of interviewing Sam 19 years ago as the religion reporter at the Chicago Tribune. In fact, Rick Hirschhout, now my AJC colleague in Los Angeles, introduced us. The Illinois Holocaust Museum had not even broken ground yet, but Rick and others were putting out a call to the Chicago area community for artifacts, ordinary items that survivors might have held on to since miraculously escaping the Nazi extermination of 1/3 of the Jewish people. Tangible reminders of that horror. Sam donated a cracked brown leather belt with a tarnished buckle taped to the end. He is with us now to share the story behind that belt, the heroism that saved him, why the existence of Israel matters, and what he hopes his testimony today and reminders like that belt will inspire for years to come. Sam, welcome to People of the Pod.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So you were just 4 years old when the Nazis occupied Poland, and you, your parents, your 7 siblings were forced to live in a ghetto. Could you please share what you know of your family's life before that and what happened to them?
Sure. I have very distinct memories of those days. They were very pleasant. I was the youngest of 7 children, and I think I was spoiled. Life was good. My father was a scribe, a sofer in Hebrew. He wrote the Torah. I remember standing at his side as he dipped his feathered ink pen and wrote each little letter, sat by a window. We went to the mikvah together. He and I were very close. I was the youngest of 7. 7, I guess, particularly if the boy was very good. 7 days in a week, creation of the world 7. It's a very important day. So that was me. And on the weekends, every Friday night, in the afternoon, we would go by horse and buggy to my grandparents in a nearby little town, Cholna, a little dorf, they called it. My grandparents had a little farm, and my grandmother would bake challah. My grandfather would have a little pony for me to ride. Life was beautiful until September. We were having lunch, and I heard noises in the sky, and the German Luftwaffe were coming to destroy the airfield. See, the Polish Air Force got its training in my town of Demblin. So the Nazis came to destroy the Polish Air Force. I remember they were circling each other, chasing each other in the air. They didn't have jets, of course. and I could see planes being shot down. And that was my first memory of what, that was in September 1939. And that was the first time I knew of the war. Of course, those same airplanes, a few days later, they came and they were shooting at people. And I could see people dying. We were all running toward another little town. We didn't know where to go. But that's the first time I saw the war came to me. Then, of course, it got worse. The Nazis came to our town. They with tanks, machine guns. They were whipping through town. Our little house was shaking as those trucks and everything went through. And then later on, the Nazis came. They started marching. A lot of soldiers marching and singing. Then they broke up and they started coming into the town. And I remember the first time they beat up a Jew. He was with a long beard. I remember a Nazi taking the butt of his gun, hitting him in the head, and he was bleeding. And I saw this as a child. Then it got worse. I remember they came to our house. They grabbed my father and they marched him outside, and they just went into the woods. My brother David followed them, hiding, and then there was four of them, four Nazis. They came and they broke. They got branches from the tree and they started beating my father till he passed out. My brother David was hiding. There was nothing he could do but cry. But the Nazis eventually left him in the woods, and David took him home. I remember him coming, and my father was leaning on him, and my father was laid down on the bed. They took off his shirt, and he was cut up all over the place. It was really sad. So that's the very first thing I remember. I also remember that they lined up men to go to work every morning. Guess what? At the end of the day, they didn't all come back, and this continued. Of course, then they made a ghetto out of our town, and you couldn't leave. You got to get food. You can't get food. One time my sister Rosa snuck out and they caught her. She was shaking when she came back. They didn't kill her. She talked her way out of it because, if they saw you, they would shoot you if you snuck out. And so ultimately what happened, people were dying of hunger. They were laying on the street, dying, no food. But those are some of the things that happened. And then it really got bad. The Nazis came. They used the Jews to work in that little Air Force that I was telling you about, where the Air Force, the Polish got training. But then the Nazis needed Jews to be slaves there. My sister Rosa went to work there, and she came back with a little food for the family. But one day, the Nazis came with a bunch of trucks, and out of the back of the trucks, all these soldiers came out. They had guns and bayonets, and they came yelling and screaming to each house, and they forced all the Jews to go to the marketplace. The place was crowded. If somebody didn't go fast enough, they would stab him or shoot him. We had 800 deaths just right then. I learned the number at the Yad Vashem, that number's down. There were 800 deaths that were killed in Demblin that day. And I was in that line. That line was gathered the Jews to go into the cattle cars, which were nearby. And I was in the line. I was small, so they hid me in the middle. And all I could see was legs and sky. Eventually, I don't know what happened, but my father pushed me out of the line and said, go over there. There was some bricks nearby, and my sister Sarah was already there. And I was running. I heard shooting in the background. I don't know if they were shooting at me, probably not. And Sarah was there hiding, and we kind of crouched. And we saw the big line of maybe 1,000 or 2,000 people going in the direction of the train. And there was crying and yelling, and they kept going. And in that line was, my parents, brothers, sisters, cousins, neighbors, friends. They all went into the cattle cars. And that's the last time I saw them all. And Sarah and I were left alone. Rosa was working in the field, so she wasn't shot. And it was her duty then to take care of us two little kids. Sarah's 2 years older than I. And that was the responsibility of Rosa. She shared her food. She was hiding us. She was a real hero. Without her, I wouldn't have lasted a day, neither would Sarah. Rosa is the one. And she continued to do that throughout liberation. That was her. She had not too many people that were able to do that. Rosa died about 8-10 years ago. And so Rosa came back from the where she was working, and the two of us were there. And she brought us food, whatever she could, and shared it with us. And we continued to see people starving until the Nazis came another time, because not all the Jews were taken.
I want to make sure we're punctuating this with time elements, Sam. This was in 1942 when the ghetto of Dublin was liquidated, correct?
Right.
Okay. So Rosa is hiding you and Sarah, and then continue. I'm sorry.
So they came to get us again. They called it Auszündung. And Rosa was there, and there was shooting in the background. We started to run. We ran on the fields. There's the farms all around our town. And in the distance, the three of us, by the way, I was still young, but I could feel I could run faster and jump higher. We were running for our lives. So we didn't know what to do. And there was a farmhouse, and outside there was an outhouse. So we opened the door, and we were in the outhouse. And we were there, and we heard shooting in the background. And pretty soon, the farmer opened the door and kicked us out of there. And we didn't know what to do, so we continued running. And to the left, I saw soldiers searching. And we kept going until Rosa saw another farm, a barn. And in that barn, on the top, there was a board missing, with a little shed below that. So we climbed the shed. She pushed me up so I could climb through that opening in that barn. I landed on the other side, and I landed on some straw. And then I was followed by Sarah, then Rosa. We covered ourselves, and we heard yelling all the time. And finally, the door was opened to that barn, and they kept yelling, "You there, Rouse, you there, Rouse, Jews come out." Boy, we were buried under that straw. We weren't breathing. We were scared, and we lay there. They looked and looked. They couldn't find us. We stayed there until the evening, and we went back through the same opening. We went home. And nearby, the neighbors, I saw a big pile. I said, I want to go see it. Rosa said, don't, let's go to sleep. You'll see it tomorrow. Well, the next day we went to see it. That pile was all of our neighbors, a lot of our neighbors. They were shot, piled up. And so we were kind of looking around, seeing if we knew anybody. But as we were looking, we noticed a little child moving. The mother must have fallen on the child to save it. I remember the face was covered with blood and all of that. And I went away. I didn't see the rest of it. I don't know what happened to that child. And that's the way it went. There was nothing but life, hunger, starvation. And the whole purpose, as you know, was for them to get rid of all the Jews. Well,
image of these children, of you as a child and your sisters confronting this horror. How old were you and your sisters at this time?
Well, you remember the ghetto, certain things can't give you dates, but I would probably, at this point, I was probably 5.5, maybe 6. Time has elapsed from the time he got there, Hitler got there. So I was at 5.5 or 6. I'm taking a guess in terms of, but.
And do you know what happened to your family? You said that was the last time you saw your parents and your siblings when they went to the train. Do you know what happened to them?
To the best of our knowledge, those trains all went to Treblinka. And in Treblinka, as you know, they were gassed and burned. If they, for some reason, didn't go to Treblinka, they went to Sobibor, but most likely Treblinka. Sobibor had just opened. So those were 2 places where they, gassed the Jews and burned them. So I would say our parents and everybody went to Treblinka. I went to visit it later, and I looked at those ovens and I said I could have been there. And look, it's a strange feeling, terrible to see all the ashes and go there and see. It's unbelievable that human beings could do this to human beings. Yet it happened, and it happened to me, and I made it. So. What happened is Rosa snuck us into the concentration camp, Sarah and me, because there was no place else to go.
A labor camp, right? Not a death camp, but a labor camp.
It was a labor camp where the job of the people there was to work on the airport. The airport was used by the Germans to go to Russia. I don't know where, but there was an airport. They needed Jews, and every once in a while they'd come and pick up 100 Jews and put them on to be killed, and new ones would be brought in who were stronger and healthier. And Rosa was there, and she shared whatever little food she had. What was it? The food was maybe a piece of bread, mostly straw. There was soup. I remember the soup. It was made out of horse meat. You were lucky to get a little bit of horse meat. Oh, we were skinny and hungry and all of that. And I didn't go to work because I was hiding. Because what does a little kid do? Can't go to work. They see a kid, they shoot him. So I was there with a few other children, and we were hiding. And if somebody ran away, the local people would find him and report him, or the Nazis would go to the woods with their dogs and find the Jews. And then what they would do is they would hang them between the barracks and the outhouse. So the Jews could see them. Hey, if you run away, that's what will happen to you. Well, I have to tell you something. I slept in the woman's barrack with my sister. They let me do because I was a kid. And I wet it wasn't really a bed, it's straw, burlap, and we had the upper bunk, there was a lot of bunks long. People were laying like sardines next to each other. And I was there, and I would wet it at night, and it would get people wet below. So I was kicked out. I went to the men's barrack. They put me on the bottom, and then I continued to wet my straw. The straw would get rotten and fleas and lice. Now, why did I not go out to the latrines outside? The latrines were, like 100 holes, and you go, so it was dirty and all that. But the reason I didn't go is there were dead people hanging and right between the outhouse and me. And to go out in the middle of the night, in a moonlit night, with somebody hanging. As a little kid, I couldn't do that, apparently. So I used to wet, and then I had lice, and that was a terrible thing. Fleas and lice. So we stayed in that camp until the Russians came close. They came to Warsaw, and then the Nazis decided, what do we do with all these Jews? We have to close this camp. So they put us into cattle cars. There were so many that the first group of, I think there were about 20 children in this camp hiding. And about 15 of them went on the first transport. They were all shot. They went to Częstochowa. Why Częstochowa? Częstochowa had, they were making bullets for the front, and they needed more laborers. So they took the people from our Demblin, put them in cattle cars, and went there. Now, the first group that went, they took all the kids that went off the train to the woods, they shot them. I was in the second transport. There were 5 of us, just 5 of us. And boy, the train trip was terrible, absolutely terrible. No food, no toilets, nothing. It was really good. That I could talk about this for a long time, but I'm really anxious to tell you about what happened when we got there. The doors yanked open in the cattle cars. I got off, and there were dogs with Nazis holding them, and they had guns and they had whips, and I was coming down. They saw me. Rosa was holding me with her left hand, and they saw me. So they pulled me away. I wouldn't go. Rosa was cried. Eventually, they obviously succeeded. They pulled me away. The guy kicked me in my chest. And I still remember, like I say, I didn't feel the pain. I remember there was a long boot coming at me, and then I was held in a separate room with 4 other children to be taken the next day to be shot like all the other kids. But an unusual thing happened. I think I'll tell you what happened. In the Demblin camp, there was a Jew who recognized, who was recognized by a soldier. The 2 of them were in World War I in the Austrian army. The Jew named Herman Venkart, saved this man. He was wounded in the battle. Venkart ran down and threw him on his back and saved his life. Now they see each other. So that Braufmann was the name of the German fellow, the Nazi, who happened to notice him. He says, "You be ready tomorrow. I want to introduce you to the SS people. Tell them what a brave Jew you are. It saved my life." So he did. They all got along, and they made him head of the whole concentration camp because of that. Now, Venkart, that guy, had a daughter my age. So when we went off to Częstochowa concentration camp, he wrote a letter, "Save this brave man who saved my life, his daughter." Well, when the German, the Nazi there, terrible guy, saw this letter, forget it. To what he was not going to listen to save this guy's child. And then the Jew kept saying, "How can you not listen to?" I don't know. They went back and forth. Finally, the Bartenschlager said, "Deine bleibt," which means yours stays. And Venkart says, "Alle oder keine." Save all 5 or none. And the guy said, "Okay." I don't know what got into him. He said, "Okay, but if I ever see them, I'll shoot them." So we had to hide under beds and all that. Anyway, we stayed there we were, what happened was this. we decided, they decided to let us in, and they opened up the gates. And as we were approaching the gates were made out of barbed wire. The Jews were leaning. The whole area was blocked off with barbed wire. 200 Jews or so were leaning on the barbed wire, seeing these skinny little kids come in that direction. They hadn't seen a child in years. Their children are gone, and here 5 skinny little kids are coming. And I'll never forget this. The door opened up. I was grabbed, hugged, kissed, taken from one hand to the other, high above, passed from one hand to the other. I think I felt that time, and even today, as though I was a Torah being passed on Simchas Torah. And it is that memory to this day, that I sort of made a promise to myself later on that I will dedicate my life to sharing my story with people, because I made it, and 1.5 million Jewish children didn't. They didn't. So that's why I tell the story so often whenever I'm asked.
That is a beautiful, horrific story, full of just amazing miracles and just circumstances. It illustrates just the randomness of circumstances that led to you living today and surviving. It's just amazing. In addition to the heroism of your sister, Rosa, and it's just really remarkable. Really remarkable.
I can't even believe it when I look back. You know, it didn't all end right there. We stayed there, and then we finally were liberated by the Russian army. It was January 17th. I celebrated January 17th, 1945. And we were lucky to be liberated. We were all lined up to be taken to Auschwitz or to march. It was a very cold winter. But I read it in a book. You know, it was a book. I went to the library and I saw Day by Day World War II. And I learned that a guy, Konyev, a Russian general, Konyev, who was trying to make a mark for himself with Stalin, he decided to move on faster than Zhukov. Zhukov was the other general. He was the #1 general. And so Konyev went faster than he was supposed to. So he came to our concentration camp. We were not too far from Auschwitz. We were liberated before Auschwitz, January 17th. Auschwitz was liberated January 27th. So
a rare example of ego saving the day.
I learned it later by reading it, and luck again. And I didn't go on the death march, and I didn't go on the train. And I still remember the Nazis getting off of the wall, and the Russians coming in early in the morning, and the Nazis are running away. The Jews are going in the kitchen. They brought me a big piece of butter from the kitchen. It must have been the size of a football. At least it seemed that way to me. They gave it to me and I ate the whole thing. Oh, did I get sick. You know, and then we left at about 5 a.m. A whole group of us from my town said, well, let's go home. So we opened the gate and there was silence. And then we heard voices. And some Jews said, let's go back. We heard it. It was the Russians. And they were approaching us in the dark. And they started to speak Russian. There was some Jews and they said, get behind us. And first I saw one Russian with a machine gun, and 5 and 10. And we were behind, and we kept going. And we saw dead people along the way. It was a front. And then we saw their tanks, and it was cold, and I didn't even have shoes. I had rags on my feet with strings around it. It was one of the coldest winters in Europe. So we kept going, and then as we kept going the next day, I was, I guess, still a kid. I remember getting on top of a tank, at a ruined tank, and pretending to play. And we worked our way through to go home, a whole group of us. Along the way, there was shooting, drunk Russians and so on. And we got there, and we were not welcome. The people said, "What? Why aren't you dead yet? You're supposed to be dead." We were chased out. We left the next day. We were left the next day.
Liberation was an ordeal in and of itself. I've heard from many survivors, and it sounds like that was the case for you as well. How did you make it to the United States?
Well, I'll tell you quickly. My sister Rosa was married to a Viennese Jew. She decided to go home to Vienna with him to see if there was anybody there. She dropped us off in Lublin, where other orphans were in Lublin. And I was with other orphans. We were all skinny. They gave us all these pills to eat to get, you know, a little food. And we were there, and she promised to come back someday. And that's what happened. I stayed in that orphanage with Sarah. And I don't know how long later, she had made some money. I guess she was selling cigarettes or something. And she came back with a truck with two Russians they were driving. In the truck, they were hauling oil cans, big oil cans in the truck to Austria. So right in the middle of the truck, they took out two barrels, and Sarah and I were hiding there as we went through Czechoslovakia and all of this, and stayed in farms. And finally, we ended up in Vienna. And in Vienna, I was placed in second grade. I had to learn German, stayed there till, when I was liberated, I was 9.5. Okay. By the time I was to Vienna, I must have been 10.5. Stayed there until I was 12. Rosa just had a little child, boy, and she thought it would be best, because they were always looking for children survivors. She thought it would be better for us to go to Israel or the United States. So that's what she did. She put us in contact with people, and they were taking us, well, I guess to Israel, but I guess we missed the ship. I learned recently that I was supposed to end up on the Exodus at Bremerhaven to go to Israel, but I missed it with Sarah and ended up in the United States through the organization of American Reorganization of European Children. Finally got us and put us, I guess Mrs. Roosevelt organized it. And we ended up in the United States. That kind of answers your question. But we continued on the ship and ended up in New York for 2 weeks. Then they shipped us by train, must be the highest, to Chicago, where the Jewish JUF took over, and I lived in a not an orphanage, a foster home with my sister Sarah. And they were looking for people that would adopt two kids. Nobody wanted to adopt 2 kids from concentration camps. So they came, they asked my sister, is it okay to my sister Sarah? She was older, so she kind of took care of me. And the agency decided to split us up. So my sister Sarah was adopted by a family in Chicago, and I was adopted. Our name was Zhezhnik before we came to the United States.
Okay.
Adopted by a family in Northbrook, Illinois, My father was a doctor, and my mother was a teacher, and their name was Harris. So I became Harris, and that happened in 1948. April 10th, 1948, my name was changed, and I lived in Northbrook, and I always wanted to be an American boy. And I told my parents I didn't want to talk about it, to throw everything away, and that's it. So now you got it, how I came to the United States. I hope I answered it.
So in fact, the name of your ship to the United States was the Ernie Pyle, right?
Yeah.
And it was the same ship. The mother of Howard Reich was also on that ship, and Howard is another former colleague of mine at the Chicago Tribune. In fact, we interviewed him on this podcast last year about this time about his time with Elie Wiesel. And I encourage listeners to find that episode and listen. So you and Sarah were separated. Did you stay in touch? And were the families that adopted you both Jewish?
Yes, both families were Jewish, and we stayed in contact. But I had a new life, and I was busy playing football and baseball and learning the language and trying to be a leader with the group. Well, not trying, I became a leader, and struggled. It's not easy to be parted from your sister and another sister, a new life, a new world. I look back, how the heck did I do it? I don't know. But I look at it now from a different point of view. This is the little child. See, I thought I was an ugly little child walking around with ripped pants, hungry. And you know who straightened me out? My wife, Dee Dee. She's getting her master's degree in sociology at the University of Chicago. One day she comes home. She was studying about all this stuff. She says, let's talk about this little boy. I said, yeah, he was, poor and orphan and all these. She said, let's talk about him. We were sitting around. We had a fire in the fireplace. Yeah, she says, was he a hero? Didn't he survive the worst of all? She going throwing all these stories at me, and she put the little boy and the man together. She straightened me out, where I didn't think this little boy was ugly, orphaned. He was a hero. She did that for me.
Wow, that's amazing. The resilience that you demonstrated through all of this is really, really remarkable.
I was always lucky to have a sister who was dynamic. I have a wife now of 61 years who was very smart. She was interested. She spent some time with Anne Frank's father. She met him, and she tells stories about that. So, and then somebody fixed us up on a date a long time ago, and we were married ever since. Anyway, I just thought I would mention to you how that was helpful to me.
So you didn't really share your testimony widely until a trip to Jerusalem in 1981. Can you talk a little about the World Gathering of Jewish Holocaust Survivors in Jerusalem that year, and what moved you to become more outspoken?
Okay, I really didn't want to go. It was going to be with, I wasn't in contact with survivors. I told you I wanted to be an American boy. But Dee Dee, my wife, persuaded us to go. So we took our children. We went there. We waited for the meetings were all over Jerusalem, and we were taking taxis and buses. So the children, Dee Dee and I, took a taxi because it took forever to get one. And we asked another couple to join us, and they started asking, where you're from, and isn't it? Turns out they were from Auschwitz, but before that, they were in my concentration camp in Częstochowa. And the man started to cry. And he said to the children who were way in the back, you don't know how lucky your father is to be here today. And Dee Dee said, well, what do you mean? He says, you know, there were others from that camp, and my job was to take them by truck and deliver them to the Nazis, and they would shoot them in the woods. And I was supposed to take them next when they came. And that's why, you remember I told you there was a story there that was part of it, and that somehow put us together. So anyway, that's really, our kids got to know the real thing, that I was really there and it really happened. Dee Dee, of course, knew it all, but the first time the kids saw all of the things that were happening with all the survivors, there were 6,000 survivors from all over the world. It was the 36th anniversary of liberation of Auschwitz. And that's why we were there. Ernie Michel, a guy from New York who was an influence on me, he helped organize it. And it was a beautiful thing to all be together, to speak. And Begin was there, and he spoke, and Elie Wiesel, and it was beautiful. It was beautiful to know we had a homeland, a place to go to, that this would never happen again. Begin promised us that. There's a lot more to talk about that thing. Even to this day, they made a coin in that memory, and we bought it. My wife made a thing for me, and I wear it all the time. And in honor of that particular of 81, there it is. See? Can you see it? Can you
Sorry, hold it up a little bit so our viewers can see. Yeah.
It over. That's the coin for liberation in 1981.
Right.
Israel made it specially. I wear it all the time.
Well, I wanted to ask you, you said that gentleman talked to your children in the back,
Yes.
and you told them how fortunate you were. Had you shared much with your children at that point?
At that point, no. Like I say, our daughter read. I used to write down part of it. It's in my book now. Every time I thought of something, I wrote down a story, and I would give it a title: If Only My Belt Could Speak, or Hiding High in the Loft when I was hiding from the Nazis, and so on. And eventually that book became Sammy, Child Survivor of the Holocaust, which, by the way, is now in 8 languages. And that book talks about what experience it talks it from a child point of view, so it's used all over the place. And my kids could see the story, and they would show it sometimes to Sunday school, but we never really sat down to talk about it. They learned it from others.
Was that reluctance more on your part or on their part? I mean, were they curious? Did they ask questions, or not necessarily?
They probably did. Not they didn't ask me too many questions. I think my daughter particularly didn't want to face the fact that I suffered so much. And our son, David, was a few years younger. Every time there was a movie on TV, he was there with Nazis with a little gun shooting at them. So I didn't really want to talk about it in those days. Eventually, I had to, when I was about 55, and there was a march on Skokie. And the Rabbi Willie Frankel, came to me. He said, "Sam, there's a book written by a Northwestern professor, The Hoax of the 20th Century, a guy by the name of Butts." He said the Holocaust didn't happen. So he got to me and interviewed me, and he showed it on the movies to other rabbis and other temples. That was really the first time I spoke publicly.
And of course, you're talking about a march in a Chicago suburb called Skokie of neo-Nazis, when neo-Nazis marched through the town. Yeah.
It was the time where I started to have to start talking. A rabbi told me, other friends told me, so I became very active. And to get you back to the thing, to your how you and I met, I had joined the Holocaust Foundation at the time, and I was with other survivors, and I saw we didn't have much of a museum, 4,000, 5,000 square feet. It was due to the march that they felt they should educate people what the Holocaust was. So I volunteered to build a new museum, the one that you talked about in Skokie, 65,000 square feet. And I got Pritzker to help me. And of course, we got your friend, we got Rick Hershout. He was our CEO, did a great job building it. Then he got promoted to the AJC. He's there now. So he and I worked very closely together. And we had people like a fellow by the name of Zweibel, a fellow by the name of Struzner, Jim Goodman, Rick Solomon. These are some of the people we put together to help raise money. There were so many.
Yeah.
Everybody I talked to wanted to be part of the museum.
It was a
wonderful, and it's now the third largest museum in the world.
It's really it's a wonderful institution, and I certainly encourage people, if they're visiting the Chicago area, to visit that museum.
Absolutely. You must mention, excuse me, that we have a hologram there, one of the first. So we had to go to, I was the second person they interviewed. We went to California. We had to answer 2,000 questions. And it's there forever to be. You sit on the stage, you can ask a question and I answer it to you, just like we're doing now. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, I recall that hologram exhibit when it opened, and I recall seeing you in a slightly different form, but yes, very similar.
You asked me a question.
Very similar looking. I'm sure I did. It was quite amazing. It was quite amazing to interact with that hologram exhibit. Before we open it up to questions from our viewers, I would like to circle back to that belt. That was the artifact to the belt.
Okay, sure.
To the belt that you donated to the museum. Where did you find it, and what did it symbolize for you?
Sure. That's a very good question. It's in my book, Sammy Child Survivor of the Holocaust. I was in the Treblinka concentration camp, and there was a closet, and I saw it hanging there. The belt is handmade, and it kind of fit my thin little tummy. And through the years, it ended up with me. It's the only thing I had left in there. So I looked at it. I told you I wrote stories. Every time something came to my mind, I wrote a story, and I put it away in yellow paper. And I had so many stories. My wife eventually says, it's got to be a book right now. But I says, wait till I die. No, I'll do it now. That's why we have the book, Sammy Child Survivor of the Holocaust. So what that story told, look at this little belt. It's cracked. It's cracked or broken in two. If only that belt could speak, it would talk about the stories it has heard, the feeling it has felt in a child's tummy. And it would go on and look at this belt. Now it is cracked. And look at me. I was trying to say, in answer to you, is this, Manya, I was trying to tell the story that the human will is strong. Look at you, you cracked apart. And it is cracked apart. It's broken in two. And this is what I was saying in that belt. It could listen to me. It could tell the story that I just told you a few minutes ago, and a lot more. It could hear. So I made it a human being. And you know what? When I go around and speak, I would take that story and hand it to a teacher. I say, read it. They could never finish it. They start crying. That's what that story meant, as it was. And ultimately, it ended up in the museum, and people read it.
And then, like you said, the belt is on display at the museum, along with other artifacts that people donated at that time. I don't want to.
My wife Didi was head of raising all the artifacts in She was the head of the committee doing that. She did a great job.
Oh, wow. What a hefty task. Well, I don't want to take away from the audience questions. We do have a few questions from our viewers. Daniel, did you want to share those with Sam?
Yes, thank you, Manya, and thank you, Sam. There's lots in the chat from people that are, really moved by your story, Sam, and so happy that you shared it with our audience today, including, by the way, from apparently your cousin Sue Friedman, who wants you to visit her. So I know there's family on as well. We have a time for a few questions, and the first one from David Easley in Philadelphia, who's asking, how did the Holocaust influence your faith? Can you say whether it strengthened or weakened your faith?
Let me say, one of the reasons that I think I made it is, I told you my father was a Soifer, we were Orthodox. I think I had a couple of things helping me. My religion and the love that I got from the family in the early days. And so we were Orthodox, and I didn't know how to pray or anything like that, except what I learned, but I didn't pursue that. It didn't, a lot of my fellow survivors stopped believing, how could God do all of this and that? And all through my book, I say I had a guardian angel and all of that. I sort of had a belief. I may not have prayed every day, but I had a belief that there was a destiny for me. I don't believe that they should turn away from God. I don't think that God had something to do with it. I think that man is given willpower, and we use it the wrong way, and I think it's man-made, all of this. So I do believe in a God. I have to. I mean, the universe is so perfect almost that I can't comprehend everything in the universe. And I do believe ultimately there seems to be a battle, good against evil. And when I autograph my book, I always write, good will prevail in the long run. It's a long battle. And the Jews have been hated for thousands of years, and we're still around. We're still around. And we will be. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, thank you, Sam. Our next question is actually from Susan Hirschhout, who says hello to you. And her question to you is, how have you changed your speech to kids and teachers, particularly within this climate of hate and anti-Semitism? Has it changed?
How has my speech changed?
The way that you speak to children and teachers, especially considering this climate of resurgent anti-Semitism and hate here.
Well, children ask questions. Mr. Harris, how come the Jews? That's been asked. I say, you know what? If you're a Hitler, Mussolini, or any of these bad guys, the first thing they'd like to do is kill people. And who came up with the 10 Commandments? I say, thou shalt not kill, and all the good things that the Jews have brought to the earth. These guys attack, and we're the guys that did it. So that's why they attack Jews. It's a simplified version. But I've learned from my previous speeches how to answer them. Like one of the questions that was asked recently is, well, Mr. Harris, what do you say to somebody who doesn't believe the Holocaust happened? I scratch my head. What do you say? Finally, I come up with an answer. I say, well, what do you say to somebody that thinks the world is flat? I get a standing ovation for that. So what happens, Sue, is I have learned from the past to come up with answers, simplified answers, quick answers, but the story is still the same. My experience is the same. And I am completely upset I'm completely disturbed with anti-Semitism that's going on at this point. You know, I was never wanted, all because I was born a Jew, a Jewish child. And I learned later on that the Jews aren't wanted. The Jews, Roosevelt had a meeting known as the Avian Conference in 1938. 32 countries got together, 200 newspapers, 24 organizations. They all met for 9 days. And guess what happened? Nobody wanted the Jews. Nobody wanted the Jews. Hitler said, I'll give them to you. I'll send them to you in ships, the best ships we have. Nobody wanted the Jews except one country came up, and it was the Dominican Republic. They said, we will take 100,000 Jews. So the anti-Semitism was there. For whatever reason, nobody wanted the Jews, and nobody wanted the Jews. And so if you see anti-Semitism, it is bad. It has gone up immensely. We have a democracy. But remember one thing, Hitler and his group were also elected democratically. And Germany was an advanced nation like we. They had Goethe, they had Lessing, they had Schindler, they had all kinds of people that accomplished, and look what they did. Not all Germans are bad, but look what they did. So I am concerned what's happening here. So it leads me to you talked about Israel earlier. I have a strong belief in Israel. It's the only place that the Jews have. If now or in the future, the Jews were being attacked again, it's the only place. And when I went back to Jerusalem and I saw how, that was in 1981, how from nothing the Jews came and built this magnificent country from the desert, fighting off millions of Arabs, thousands of tanks, and so on. So I'm giving you a long answer, but somewhere I hope I've answered your question, but I can go on.
Was that your first trip to Israel, Sam, in 1981?
1981. No, I think it was the second trip. I have my sister Rosa had a son who got married, and Didi and I went to the wedding, and that was our second trip. I went for a third trip to visit. Rick Hershot came with us. Hey, we went to talk to the head of the museum in Jerusalem, Yad Vashem, and to look at the museum because we were building a new one. And so that was the third time I went.
Thank you, Sam. I have, with the 1 minute we have remaining, I do want to get to this very last question from Stephanie Trask in St. Louis, who said, what message would you like to leave with people? And what would you like people to remember about you and your experiences?
I think the message that I would like to leave is that the human is stronger than we give it credit to. Really. That's the message, basic message that I would like to live. I think that hatred is something that we have to figure out how to do, because there was a fellow by name of Pastor Niemöller. Did you ever hear Pastor Niemöller, a Lutheran minister? He says, first they came for the communists, and I was not a communist, so I didn't speak out. Then they came for the socialists, I didn't speak out. Then they came for the gays, and I didn't speak out. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out. And there was no one left to speak out for me when they came to me. What I like to say in the United States, we're from all over the world, that they pick on one group, they pick on all. I think the Jews are the what are they? The little canary in a coal mine. They're picking us. We better all get together. That's what Pastor Martin Niemöller tried to left behind us. They come after the Jews, they get the Jews, they get the Poles, they get and so on. That's the second message I would like to leave. We have to all stick together.
Sam, you have been so generous with your time and your wisdom, and I know your testimony is not easy to share. And so thank you so very much for sharing it with our audience. It's such an honor to talk to you again, such a privilege to be able to do it multiple times over such a long period of time. Daniel,
Let's not wait 20 years again.
Let's not wait 20 years again.
I'll be happy to wait 20 years to talk.
Daniel, any last words to close our program?
Yes, thank you, Manya and Sam. Really a special thank you for your moving, full, and powerful testimony, reminding us really why we must never forget the past and its enduring lessons. And for those of you who've joined us today and are interested in more programming, AJC programming around International Holocaust Remembrance Day, please consider joining the Jacob Blaustein Institute for the Advancement of Human Rights this Friday, January 27th at 1:30 p.m. for a conversation between UN Undersecretary General Alice Indiridu, the Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, and Director of JBI Felice Gare, as they discuss the dangerous impact of ongoing Holocaust denial and distortion worldwide and the efforts to strengthen the UN's response to these high-profile incidents. The link to join virtually is in the chat. Sam, Manya, thank you both again, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.